Glash, Annie, I don't see how you manage to hit her every time. That's easy, Tag. Why don't you learn to see just the bullseye and nothing else? All you have to do is point your gun at it and pull the trigger. I mean, that's all you have to do. Gail Davis was television's first female Western star. Little girls dressed like her for Halloween. Boys had crushes on her. Gene Autry called her the perfect Western actress and gave her 81 episodes as Annie Oakley. But when the cameras stopped rolling in 1961, something strange happened. The woman who could hit an acorn at 60 yards vanished. For 36 years, Hollywood's sharpshooter lived in the shadows of San Fernando Valley. What happened to America's sweetheart? The truth will shock you. I'm not kind, just reasonable. You know, there's a certain railroad detective by the name of Rodney. He claims that you robbed our depot and then another depot in Dodge City. Betty Jean Grayson was born on October 5, 1925, in Little Rock, Arkansas. Her father, Dr. James Grayson, was a respected physician who later became the state health officer for Arkansas. This made him one of the most important health officials in the state at a time when public health was still developing. Betty grew up surrounded by the expectations that came with her family's status. Her childhood was shaped by both comfort and responsibility. Her father's work kept the family in the public eye, and Betty learned early what it meant to serve the community and aim high. When Betty was just 3 years old, she was named Most Beautiful Baby in Arkansas. The prize for this title was not a simple ribbon or medal, it was a horse. That horse introduced her to the world of riding. From the moment she could climb into the saddle, Betty developed a deep connection with animals. She spent much of her childhood exploring the outdoors on horseback. By 6, she was already known for her riding skills, and horses became a key part of who she was. This early gift would spark a passion that stayed with her for life. At age 8, Betty's father gave her a rifle. In rural Arkansas, this might not have seemed so unusual, but what happened next certainly was. Betty picked up that rifle and started shooting acorns off trees in McGehee. Tiny targets, moving targets, and she hit them again and again. Her family and neighbors were amazed. She practiced for hours, turning what started as fun into real skill. Betty wasn't just good, she was extraordinary. Shooting became second nature, and her reputation grew fast. By the time she turned 9, Betty could hit an acorn at 60 yards while shooting backwards. Imagine that. A child barely out of primary school, pulling off a shot that many adults wouldn't even attempt. It wasn't luck. It was focus, practice, and raw talent. People began to take notice. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers were stunned by what she could do with a gun. These early feats laid the groundwork for the performer she would one day become. What started in the quiet woods of Arkansas would eventually wow audiences nationwide. Her childhood wasn't just about marksmanship and horses. Betty was raised as a tomboy. In McGehee, she roamed the fields and forests, fearless and free. By 6, she could ride like a pro. But there was another side to her. From age 8, she took part in beauty contests and musical shows. She was just as comfortable on stage as she was on horseback. These experiences helped her build confidence. They taught her how to stand tall, smile for a crowd, and handle the spotlight. She was becoming a well-rounded performer without even knowing it. In 1945, Betty's life changed again. While studying drama and dance at the University of Texas at Austin, she met Bob Davis. They married and soon had a daughter, Terry. At that time, it was normal for women to marry young. The average age was about 21. But Betty wasn't just focused on home life. She had bigger dreams. The marriage didn't last long, but it did set her on the path to California. Betty was determined to try her luck in Hollywood. After the war, Betty and Bob moved to Hollywood. It was the place to be for anyone with big dreams. California's population was booming, and studios were making hundreds of films each year. Betty took a job as a hat-check girl to make ends meet. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept her close to the action. The odds were against her. Only a tiny fraction of hopefuls ever made it big. But Betty had grit. She kept pushing, kept showing up, and kept believing she could break through. In 1946, a talent scout from MGM noticed her. Betty signed a contract, every aspiring actor's dream. But there was a problem: her name. They couldn't use Betty Davis because of the famous Bette Davis, and they couldn't use Betty Grayson because of Katherine Grayson. It was a small thing, but it showed how little control actors had over their own lives. The studio decided what you'd be called, what you'd wear, and what kind of roles you'd play. That was just the way things worked back then. A studio executive came up with a new name: Gail Davis. Simple, fresh, easy to remember. That name marked the start of a whole new chapter for Betty. She was no longer just a girl from Arkansas. She was Gail Davis, an actress ready for Hollywood. The name change wasn't just about branding. It was about leaving behind the old and stepping into something bigger. From that moment, she began to shape the image that fans would come to know and love. Gail's film career started in 1947. Her first part was in a comedy short. It wasn't a big role, but it was a start. She went on to appear in 4 more films that year, including The Romance of Rosie Ridge, an MGM hit in Technicolor. Even though her part wasn't credited, being in a film like that was a big deal. Most actors waited years for a chance like it. Hollywood was pumping out more than 400 films in 1947 alone, and competition was fierce. Gail stood out because she kept landing parts. It was clear she had the talent, the timing, and the drive to make her mark. Gail Davis didn't start her career on a Hollywood set. It began at a rodeo in Texas. Gene Autry himself spotted her there while she was studying drama and dance at the University of Texas at Austin. Davis was already a skilled rider and a sharp shot, someone who could hit an acorn at 60 yards while riding backward by the time she was 9 years old. Her father, a surgeon from McGehee, Arkansas, had encouraged her love for horses and shooting. When Autry saw her at the rodeo, he was immediately impressed by her authentic Western style and told her to look him up in Hollywood if she ever decided to act. After graduation, she did just that. Autry remembered her and gave her a shot as an extra in Westerns. That chance meeting at the rodeo changed everything. Her first big break came in 1948, when Autry cast her in The Far Frontier alongside Roy Rogers. Released by Republic Pictures, the film was shot in true color, a then-new color process that was lost over time. Even though most surviving copies are black and white, the movie marked Davis' real entry into Hollywood. Working with Rogers and other Western greats put her on the map. Between 1948 and 1953, Davis appeared in 32 feature films, most of them Westerns, and 20 of these were made by John Autry's company. She was one of the most visible women in the genre at the time. She did most of her own stunts, roping, riding, and shooting, just like she had learned as a child. Directors loved her skill and authenticity, and audiences liked her honest, fearless style. Gene Autry thought she was perfect for Westerns. That's what he called her, the perfect Western actress. He put her as the female lead in 15 of his movies. Back then, most Westerns focused on male heroes, so seeing a strong woman character was rare. Autry wanted someone who could be a role model for girls as well as boys. Davis had the talent and toughness, and she was also natural in front of the camera. Autry's support helped her become one of the most popular Western actresses of her time. She also appeared in at least 28 episodes of The Gene Autry Show on CBS between 1950 and 1956. On screen, she played ranchers' daughters, brave cowgirls, and clever heroines. Her range and presence stood out. Audiences loved seeing her and Autry together. and she often went on tour with him at live rodeos, performing stunts in person across North America. Autry decided there was one more thing that could make her a true trailblazer. In 1954, he created the Annie Oakley television series just for her. Until then, most westerns on TV had male heroes. Autry thought girls deserved someone to look up to. Davis had already proven herself in dozens of his films. Her skill as a horsewoman and a sharpshooter was real, and she was a strong, appealing performer. When Annie Oakley premiered in January 1954, it was the first Western show with a woman as its star. The show ran for 81 episodes in syndication until February 1957. Davis wore her own hair and pigtails, a fringe outfit made especially for the show, and performed most of her stunts. Unlike most Western heroes, Annie Oakley rarely shot to kill. Instead, she outsmarted her enemies or shot guns right out of their hands. Even though she was only 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed less than 100 pounds, Davis brought a sense of cleverness and grit to the role that audiences loved. Fans nicknamed the show Pigtails and Pistols, and Annie's home was set in Diablo, Arizona. Her younger brother, Tag, played by Jimmy Hawkins, and Deputy Lofty Craig, played by Brad Johnson, often appeared alongside her. Viewers liked the mix of action, light humor, and Annie's fearless attitude. Davis didn't rely on a stunt double. She would do tricky shots like hitting Christmas ornaments off spinning wheels or using a mirror to aim backward. Her skill was no camera trick. Gene Autry's flying of productions produced the series, and it became a cultural hit. Even after its 3-year run, ABC reran the show from 1959 to 1960 and again from 1964 to 1965. Younger audiences kept discovering Annie Oakley. The show was more than entertainment. It showed girls they could be brave and smart, too. At the height of her fame as the star of Annie Oakley between 1954 and 1956, Gail Davis was caught up in a secret that nobody outside her inner circle ever suspected. For over 8 years, she was having an affair with Gene Autry, the singing cowboy, a legendary star who was 18 years older than her. Autry was already married to Ana Mae Spivey, whom he had wed back in 1932, and he had built a huge empire as a producer. Even though Autry was her mentor, her boss, and the man who gave her the stage name Gail Davis, they kept their affair so private that it never hit the press. It was a passionate, complicated relationship that lasted through most of Davis's years on Annie Oakley and beyond. According to Holly George Warren, who wrote Public Cowboy No. 1, Davis even begged Autry to leave his wife for her, but he wouldn't. Instead, he chose to stay in his marriage and keep the affair secret. Even Hollywood insiders, publicists, and close friends kept it under wraps, knowing that any scandal could destroy their careers at a time when the industry was so strict about personal lives. Before she rose to fame as a television star, Davis was married to Robert Davis, whom she had met while they were studying dramatics at the University of Texas at Austin. They had a daughter named Terry together, who was born in 1952. That was also the year their marriage ended. The pressure of her acting career was already putting a strain on their relationship. Even before Terry was born, they had moved to Hollywood after World War II, where Davis took a job as a hat-check girl before being discovered and landing a small role in the romance of Rosie Ridge in 1947. Once her career took off, especially after Gene Autry put her in 14 movies during the late 1940s and early 1950s, there was hardly any time left for family life. The birth of her daughter was supposed to bring happiness, but instead it happened just as her career was reaching new heights, and as she was becoming emotionally entangled with Autry. Balancing motherhood with long days on set was impossible. By 1952, she was a single mother at a time when single parenthood was still looked down on. Later in life, she admitted that the stress of trying to have both a career and a family was too much for her. On June 25, 1959, she hoped to put those struggles behind her. That was when she married Richard Pierce, a recording executive in Las Vegas. This came just 2 years after Annie Oakley ended in 1957, when Davis was trying to rebuild her life outside of television. She and Pierce lived together in her home in Studio City, California. But this second marriage would not last either. After 8 years together, they divorced in 1967. Pierce was part of the music business, and Davis had tried to explore recording at that time too. Even though she hoped they could support one another creatively, the same old pattern followed her into this new chapter. That attempt to move into music was never successful. Even though Columbia and RCA Victor had offered her deals, she failed to sell records to either children or adults. Children still knew her as the pigtailed sharpshooter from Annie Oakley, and adults still thought of her as a supporting player in Gene Autry's westerns. Bob Leshak, who wrote From Small Screen to Vinyl, noted that none of Davis' records ever caught on. Even as she hoped to follow the path of Gene Autry and other singing cowboys, she was too closely tied to her famous television role. Later, she would look back on these years and admit that being Annie Oakley had been both a gift and a curse, and always there was Gene Autry. Even though most of the public never knew, their affair shaped the way Davis thought about her career and her relationships. Autry was married and a powerful figure in her life. Every time she hoped they could be together publicly, he pulled back. She kept working for him, always knowing that if she crossed him, her career could end. Keeping that secret took its toll. Davis stayed attached to him long after most people would have walked away. It shaped her decisions, her marriages, and the way she handled stress. By the early 1960s, Gail Davis was trapped. Hollywood had decided that she was Annie Oakley forever. Directors would tell her that if she wanted to do anything different, she would need to wait a few years, dye her hair, and cut off her pigtails. That was their way of saying they could only see her one way. Even though she had already appeared in more than 30 films and many television shows, they couldn't imagine her as anything but the pig-tailed sharpshooter. In a 1982 interview, she explained how people would say, "Gail, I'd like to hire you, but you're going to have to wait a few years, dye your hair, and cut off your pigtails." She was proud of her work as Annie Oakley, but that one role became a cage. It was so strong that directors couldn't see her as a sexy character or as a villain. She was always going to be Annie Oakley, so she retired. Her final acting role came in 1961. On November 27th, she appeared in the Andy Griffith Show episode The Perfect Female. She played Karen Moore, Thelma Lou's cousin, a sharp-eyed woman who could shoot better than most men. That episode showed the charm and skill that had made Davis famous. The shooting contest between Andy and Karen was funny and exciting. The wooded scenes were filmed at Upper Franklin Reservoir in Franklin Canyon Park, and the crow shooting scene was probably filmed at Sage Ranch Park or the Iverson Movie Ranch. It was the perfect tribute to the character that had defined her career. But after that, there were no more roles for Gail Davis. Her time in front of the camera had ended. Directors kept telling her the same thing. They couldn't see her in anything new. Even if she changed her hair or her look, they thought of her as Annie Oakley. It didn't matter that she had studied drama and dance at the University of Texas. It didn't matter that she was experienced and talented. Annie Oakley was wholesome, clever, and never truly violent. She didn't kill her enemies. She outsmarted them or shot the guns right out of their hands. That was part of what made her a great role model for girls. But that one image was so strong that no one would give her the chance to do anything else. Davis herself once said that people told her, "Why don't you cut your pigtails, dye your hair, and change your personality?" But that wasn't who she was. She was Gail Davis, and she was also Annie Oakley. By the time the Annie Oakley Show ended in 1957, Davis had already built up 15 years of work in Hollywood. She was a good writer, a good shot, and did most of her own stunts. Her role as Annie Oakley was one of the most famous female characters on television, and it inspired a whole generation of girls to dream bigger. But this success also created a wall she couldn't climb over. Casting agents and producers only thought of her as the pig-tailed heroine. They couldn't see her in a romantic part or as a tough villain. In that same interview in 1982, Davis explained again that she was told to wait, change her hair, and drop her pigtails. But even then, they weren't sure they could ever believe her as someone else. That was why she left Hollywood. After her last appearance in 1961, she hoped to do other kinds of work, maybe theater, voice work, or working behind the camera. But the Annie Oakley image was too strong. Even when she showed up at festivals or appeared as herself on TV, people still thought of her as Annie. Gail Davis's third marriage began on June 19, 1971, in Los Angeles. She married Carl Edward Guerriero, who was an auto dealer. This was very different from the Hollywood world she had lived in for so long. Their marriage lasted just over a decade, until Carl's death on May 20, 1982. Of all her marriages, this was the most stable. Carl brought her a sense of calm that she had not known before. After years of ups and downs, this was a period of real peace. But his death hit her hard. By then, she had already retired from acting and was living a quiet life in the San Fernando Valley. She appeared at Western-themed events and film festivals now and then, and fans still admired her work as Annie Oakley. Carl's passing ended what had been the most settled part of her personal life. After he was gone, Gail became more withdrawn. Friends noticed she rarely attended Hollywood gatherings or spoke much to old co-stars. Even though she was once a lively, energetic star, Carl's death left her feeling empty. She stayed in her San Fernando Valley home and stopped reaching out. Some people thought she had been forever frozen in time as Annie Oakley. Casting directors never gave her other roles, and that only added to her sense of isolation. Except for her daughter Terry and a few close friends, she mostly kept to herself. Fans still loved her, but she felt more like a memory of her own past. During her retirement, Gail only appeared occasionally at Western festivals and collectors' shows. These were some of the few public events where people could see her. For example, she attended the Knoxville Film Festival in 1989. Fans would come up to her, happy to meet the woman who had inspired them as Annie Oakley. Even though these appearances were rare, they were special to her admirers. Gail would smile, sign autographs, and chat politely, but she rarely stayed long, and she never tried to restart her career. She was content to live quietly, proud of the trail she had blazed for other women, even as Hollywood forgot her. Her last big public moment was in 1994, when she was honored with the Golden Boot Award. The award was created by actor Pat Buttram and celebrated Western performers. That year, she appeared alongside famous names like James Coburn and Robert Mitchum. The Golden Boot was a heartfelt tribute to her contributions to Westerns. The ceremony was emotional for her. At nearly 70, she thanked everyone with a few short remarks. It was one of the last times people saw her in public. After that, she faded even further from view. Although her name was on a star at 6385 Hollywood Boulevard by the 1990s, most people walked past it without knowing much about the woman behind it. Gail had once been celebrated as a trailblazer, but as the years passed, she spent her days in quiet isolation. The bright lights of Hollywood had moved on, and so had she. Her home was her sanctuary, where she thought about the career she'd had and the people she'd lost. In her final years, she was diagnosed with brain cancer. It was a devastating illness that changed everything. Brain cancer can come on quickly. Many people don't notice the signs at first, and by the time they do, it is often too late. Gail's illness progressed fast. Even the best care at St. Joseph Medical Center in Burbank could not stop it. Her daughter Terry was with her when she died on March 15, 1997. The date, March 15th, felt symbolic, like the end of a chapter. Her passing showed the sharp contrast between her public and private life. Annie Oakley had been bold and brave, but off-screen, Gail had often felt overlooked and lonely. Once she was typecast, good roles never really came again. Her last appearance on screen had been in a 1961 episode of The Andy Griffith Show, and that was where her acting career ended. Personal losses, like Carl Guerriero's death, only added to her solitude. When she was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, it was among some of Hollywood's greatest names. The cemetery is grand, and being there honored her place in entertainment history. But it also reflected the loneliness that followed her career. Her grave, like her star on the Walk of Fame, is a place for quiet reflection. Fans still visit to remember her as the first female lead in a television western. Even if she spent her last years away from the spotlight, her impact remains. Her story is one of success, struggle, and the quiet grace of someone who once lit up the screen, then found a different kind of life once the applause had faded.